Welcome to our pre-recorded workshop on emotional resilience. I'm Peter and I'll be presenting this workshop with my colleague Victoria. Both Victoria and I are student counsellors working at Student Wellbeing in Hutton Hub. We've designed this workshop to focus on understanding and developing emotional resilience. The workshop will include some informational slides as well as activities that we encourage you to take part in. You should have already been given access to the handouts for this workshop by your programme lead or lecturer. We're aware that not everyone has access to a printer, so if you've been unable to print out the handouts, please do so using a notepad or plain paper, as you can still take part in the activities. If handouts haven't been made available to you, please do let your programme lead or lecturer know and they will be able to help.
Before we start with the workshop, there are a couple of points to remember whilst you take part. Please remember that this workshop is educational and not a counselling session, so please only share what you feel comfortable sharing. If you are taking part in this workshop with other people, please do only share your own experiences and not those of others. We would like to keep this a confidential space, so again, if you are taking part with other people, please do agree within your group that what is said during the workshop stays within this space. Please do get involved where you can, especially if you're working with others, as when we designed this workshop, we found the more people engaged, the more memorable it was for them. During this workshop, we are going to be discussing the following topics. We're going to look at understanding what impacts our mental health and what is emotional resilience. We're going to explain what a stress bucket is and how we know what our limits are. We're going to look at understanding emotions and what to do with them, unhelpful and helpful thinking styles. We're going to look at learning and developing self-compassion, and the final point is we're going to look at reaching out and what this means to us.
So what is emotional resilience? Take a moment to have a think about what this phrase means to you. Does it already have a specific meaning to you? Or have there been times in your life where you feel you have been emotionally resilient? Or felt you lacked emotional resilience? What does the word resilient mean to you? And does the word resilient change its meaning when you put the word emotional in front of it? We've chosen a few definitions that we think help to explain the notion of emotional resilience. Part of the human condition is that we can't avoid experiencing challenges and difficulties in our life. Stress is inevitable. But one of the main ways we can respond to the stress and difficulties, and what can often feel like our only response in some situations, is by adapting and recovering to these stresses. In our view, part of what being emotionally resilient means, therefore, is that we adapt and recover better or more effectively to these stresses and challenges, rather than avoiding the challenges because they are too difficult. Emotions play a big role in understanding what it means to be emotionally resilient, as one of the ways that we know we are experiencing a stressor or difficulty is through what our emotions tell us. For example, when we feel anxious, sad, angry, or ashamed. In other words, emotional resilience is about developing and using our emotions to cope with or manage the challenges or stresses we experience.
You're about to watch a clip taken from Guy Winch's TED Talk on emotional first aid. We wanted to include this clip as we feel it describes the importance of emotional resilience and why some of us may not have developed emotional resilience in a clear and understandable way. This is a clip taken from a 15-minute TED Talk, so if you're interested in watching the remainder of the talk, we have put a link to it in our resources section. We hope you enjoyed that short clip. What Guy Winch is saying is that psychological injuries are just as important as physical injuries, but it can be easy for us to overlook them because we cannot see them. We may also not be taught from a young age that we can get psychological injuries, such as those that come from bereavement, shame, rejection, and the lasting impact these injuries have on us if we ignore them. If you think about when you break a bone, if you were to ignore this break, it doesn't mean the bone is no longer broken, but by ignoring the injury, you could sustain longer-term damage or a physical weakness in that area. We need to think about psychological injuries in the same way. If we ignore them, it doesn't make them heal, but could mean that we are more vulnerable to that type of injury in the future. For example, If we experience rejection, because it can be painful, this could lead us to avoid feeling this way again. This may mean that we are reluctant to get into another relationship, or if we do enter a new relationship, it could impact how we behave and feel in the relationship. This is why thinking about and acknowledging psychological injuries and how we address them could be really important for us.
When we defined what emotional resilience is, we explained how part of the human condition is that we experience stresses and challenges. We would like to now invite you to think about what kinds of challenges or experiences could have a negative impact on our mental health. You will see some rain clouds on the screen with some examples of challenges that can impact your mental health, such as self-esteem and confidence, exam stress, and anxiety. We would like you to reflect more on this now. Please pause the video here to give yourself time to think about any challenges that you feel are relevant to you. If you are completing this workshop in a group, use the time to discuss with each other. Now you have had time to think about the possible challenges you may be experiencing. Do they match up with the remaining examples we have? Are there any challenges that we haven't put on the screen that impact a student's life? And are there any that you were surprised to see? Now we'd like to introduce you to the stress bucket concept or metaphor. Please have the stress bucket handout that we have provided ready to use. If you're unable to print this out or write on it with a Word program, please take some time to copy the diagram as best you can on some blank paper. Please pause the audio until you have copied the diagram. When working on this activity throughout the workshop, please keep yourself safe and only think about and write down what you feel comfortable with. The rationale for this handout is that by the end of the workshop, you will have your own personalised stress bucket and coping strategies for building your emotional resilience. Imagine that you are represented by the bucket. The rain and water represent challenges and difficulties that you may be facing, like we mentioned in the previous slide. Please take a few moments to write down some of the difficulties or challenges you're currently experiencing on the stress bucket handout, where the clouds and rain are located. And please pause the audio until you're ready to continue. The higher the water level in the bucket rises, the more pressure and difficult our challenges are to manage. As the water from the rain builds inside the bucket, would you be surprised if the bucket eventually overflowed with water? Without any way for the water to escape, the water will continue to rise or reduce until a difficulty or problem has either been finally resolved or the problem has been put on hold. When the bucket overflows, that's when we can feel anxious, overwhelmed, stressed, exhausted, lash out at others, and feel low in mood. What would be helpful is to be able to put holes into the bucket that will allow the water to flow out during our challenges, rather than a constant build-up that leads to an overflow. The bucket holes will be the self-care that you do. Sometimes we don't have enough bucket holes to manage or release the water pressure, and sometimes these bucket holes can get blocked as we forget about maintaining them. If you can remember or identify when they are blocked, then this can help you to release some of the water pressure so that your bucket doesn't overflow and you aren't always overwhelmed. Developing emotional resilience is like creating bucket holes. The bucket holes that we look at in this workshop are understanding your emotions and what to do with them, looking at any unhelpful thinking you may be doing and consider alternative helpful thinking, learning about self-compassion and developing an internal friend, and reaching out for social support. Before we look at the coping mechanisms or bucket holes, it's important that we first identify what our emotional or psychological limits are. Everyone's minds and bodies have different limits on what they can or believe they can reasonably cope with, without feeling overwhelmed. So, how do we know where our limits are? They tell us through our body sensations or symptoms. For example, you may have experienced your heart racing, having rapid and intense thoughts, tense muscles, and breathing very fast or hyperventilating. Or you may have experienced withdrawing from other people, activities or tasks, and feeling sad or numb. But not only do we have limits for uncomfortable feelings and overwhelm, we also have limits for when we are relaxed or experiencing healthy or helpful stress. For example, when you are relaxed, you may notice that you are generally calm, less active, and more comfortable. What kinds of things do you tend to do when you're relaxed? Please take a few moments to discuss this amongst your group, or think about and write down in the stress bucket handout under the relaxed box what it's like for you to experience this feeling of relaxation in symptoms, emotions and behaviours. Pause the audio until you've done this activity and are ready to continue. Once your relaxation limit has been crossed by the water build-up, you may experience a kind of healthy or helpful stress. It is a myth that stress is only bad or unhelpful. In fact, there is a good type of stress that helps us experience all sorts of things, like excitement, joy, proactivity, and passion for things. Please take a few moments to discuss this amongst your group, and think about and write down in the stress bucket handout under the helpful stress box what it's like for you to experience helpful stress in symptoms, emotions, and behaviours. For example, are you more motivated, active, or content? What kinds of things do you tend to do when you're in this mental state? Please pause the audio until you've done this activity and are ready to continue. Once your helpful stress limit has been crossed by the water build-up, you then may move into the unhelpful and overwhelmed territory of stress. People experience and respond to feeling distressed and overwhelmed in different ways. Some people may feel panic and anxiety. Some may withdraw into themselves and detach or dissociate from their feelings. This type of stress is unhealthy unless you're in a life-threatening situation, in which case it may help to feel really stressed because your body is preparing you to protect yourself from a perceived threat. This is the fight or flight response in action. However, if you are in no real danger, even if it feels like you are, then this stress can be thought of as unhealthy, as it makes it hard for you to function well and do the things you need to do to take care of yourself on a daily basis. What's it like for you to feel stressed, overwhelmed, low, or numb? What symptoms or sensations do you notice in your body when you experience these states? How do you behave when you're experiencing this stress or feeling low? Please discuss this amongst your group if you feel uncomfortable, and write down the answers in the overwhelmed box on the stress bucket handout. Please pause the audio until you've done this activity and are ready to continue.
To be emotionally resilient is to implement the holes, which are coping mechanisms, and to maintain these holes so that the water level doesn't exceed what your limits are. Remember that sometimes these holes may become blocked, which is when we forget to maintain them, which happens. The important thing is remembering what you can do to unblock the holes to reduce the water level, especially if you feel like it's rising. When we go through these bucket holes, please do use your own stress bucket handout and put down your own coping mechanisms and bucket holes. Adapt them so they're more personalised to you. The first coping mechanism or bucket hole that we'll be looking at is understanding emotions and what to do with them. One of the ways we can look at emotions is by thinking about a car dashboard. One of the main uses for a car dashboard is to give you information about the car, whether it's how fast the car is travelling or any warning lights or signals that may mean there's something wrong. Now imagine you're in the car and the petrol light comes on. What could this be telling us? That the fuel is low. Same for the tyre pressure light. This could mean your pressure's low, it might mean a puncture. If we were to ignore these warning lights, does this make the issue with the car go away? No, it doesn't. But it could mean that eventually the car may stop working because it has a flat tyre or it's run out of fuel, meaning that you're stuck or you're unable to get to your destination. Emotions are like these because they're like warning lights. They're telling us what is going on for us in the moment. And like the car dashboard, if we were to ignore how we're feeling because it's inconvenient or we don't understand, it doesn't mean the feelings go away. They could become worse or, like the car, mean we're stuck and we do not feel we can move forward. Now, imagine you're back in the car, driving along and the warning lights come on. You may need to pull over to a safe place, for example a hard shoulder. What you would normally do is look at the light, figure out what the light is telling you, and then, based on this information, plan your next move. For example, your tyre light comes on, you pull over, check the light, you might get out of the car, check which tyre it is. Then you make a decision based on that information. You might be able to change the tyre, but you also might need to call someone for support or to help resolve the issue like AA. Using this example, we can make a structure in helping us to understand our emotions. So when you're feeling a certain emotion, let's take anger for example. Like pulling the car onto a hold shoulder, take a couple of deep breaths. Think about what it is that you're feeling. Name the emotion. Ask yourself, what might be causing this feeling? So in the example of anger, you may find yourself in a situation where you're arguing with friends, or you're hearing a conversation that you don't necessarily agree with or feel comfortable with. You can then think about whether you can do something about the situation that may help how you're feeling. For example, removing yourself from the situation. So, like the car dashboard, we're identifying what the warning light is, naming the emotion. We're giving ourselves a chance to take a couple of deep breaths, figure out what might be causing that emotion, and then making a plan moving forwards on the information that we have gained. Another aspect of understanding emotions is thinking about how we communicate how we are feeling. As I just explained, emotions communicate different things to us, but we can also use them to communicate with others. On the screen you will see 6 faces of different individuals. Each person is showing a different emotion on their face. Have a quick think, or if you're in a group, guess together. What emotion is each individual showing? Do they look happy, sad, shocked, angry, disgusted? One of the ways that communicating how we are feeling to others is helpful is that it can attract others to support us, as well as potentially indicating when we need a break. It can motivate our behaviours, keep us safe, and help us to connect with others and build relationships. Now we have a better understanding of our emotions and what they communicate to ourselves and other people, we can look at what to do with the emotions. The first thing to remember when you're experiencing a big emotion is to pause, like slowing the car. Think about what emotion you are feeling. Think about why you might be feeling that way, such as understanding what the warning lights are in a car. Ask yourself whether there is anything you can do about the situation that may help or change how you are feeling. One of the ways you could do this is by channeling or expressing the emotions. We are going to demonstrate how to channel or express your emotions through the use of a mind map. Please pause the workshop here and take some time, approximately 5 minutes, to think about ways you can channel how you are feeling. If you're in a group, please discuss amongst yourselves. Remember that you can all learn from each other. Examples of channeling our emotions might be physical activity, seeing friends or socialising, listening to music, or being creative with art. Please pause the tape now. Now that you've finished that exercise, how did you find it? If you were discussing with others, what were the things that other people had done that you hadn't tried? Although it can be easier to avoid or distract ourselves from uncomfortable or difficult emotions, as discussed earlier with the analogy of the car, ignoring how we are feeling doesn't mean we stop feeling that way, but it can render us stuck or, at a later point, unable to move forwards. It is good to channel or express how we are feeling, as it gives us a way of taking a big emotion from inside and releasing it so we're not holding on to or carrying it anymore. Take a couple of minutes to look at the stress bucket handout. Find the section on understanding emotions and what to do with them, and write down activities that help you to cope with your emotions. Having them written down on the handout will help you when you need a reminder of what you can do to help yourself. Please take a couple of minutes to do this before moving on to the next slide.
Our thoughts play a big role in how we feel and behave, being responsible for how we assess situations or events, as well as assessing how well we think we're able to cope. These kinds of thoughts can be automatic and involuntary, quick and intense, which can sometimes make us feel uncomfortable, especially if the thoughts are negative. When there is a pattern or tendency for specific thoughts to occur in specific situations or events, we call them thinking styles. Many negative automatic thoughts tend to be unhelpful, affecting our mood, emotions, and behaviour. These are called unhelpful thinking styles, and, using the stress bucket metaphor, they can tend to increase the water pressure in the bucket, adding more stress to the challenges and difficulties we face. Developing emotional resilience can do at least 3 things here. 1. They can help you to be more aware of your unhelpful thinking styles when they occur. 2. They can help you to challenge or question whether your unhelpful thinking styles are reasonable in a specific situation. And 3, they can help you to replace the unhelpful thinking styles with helpful thinking styles more often. In the stress bucket metaphor, helpful thinking styles can act as another bucket hole for relieving stress. We have presented here 10 common unhelpful thinking styles that most, if not all, people experience at one time or another. If you look to the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see one called jumping to conclusions, which is a very common unhelpful thinking style and comes in 2 types. Mind reading, which refers to us assuming that we know what others are thinking, and fortune telling, which refers to us assuming we can predict the future, especially in a negative way. Directly to the right of jumping to conclusions is another common unhelpful thinking style called catastrophizing, in which we assume we can predict the future as a worst case scenario or worst outcome. Take some time to look through the 10 unhelpful thinking styles, identifying any that you notice yourself doing when upset or stressed. Discuss in a group how the unhelpful thinking styles affect your emotions and behaviour. When you've identified the unhelpful thinking styles that are relevant to you, add them to the stress bucket handout in the appropriate box. Please pause the audio until you've done this activity and are ready to continue. These 10 helpful thinking styles complement the 10 unhelpful thinking styles in the previous slide and are presented in the same layout to make it easier for you to compare each specific helpful thinking style with its corresponding pair from the unhelpful thinking styles. For example, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see consider the evidence, which is directly an alternative pair to the jumping to conclusions thinking style in the previous slide. These handouts should be available to you, so please ask your tutor or lecturer if you cannot access them. Identify the helpful thinking styles you'd like to adopt in groups and discuss how using them might affect your emotions and behaviour. When you've identified the helpful thinking styles that are relevant to you, add them to the stress bucket handout in the appropriate box. Please pause the audio until you've done this activity and are ready to continue.
The next bucket hole or coping mechanism that we're going to look at now is self-compassion, or how we can be a bit more of an internal friend to ourselves. We're going to hopefully show you this through the use of 2 different activities, which we'll go through in the following slides. The first activity we're going to do is titled Letter to Bob. You'll be able to see on the screen in front of you a picture of the handout. If you've been able to print this out, if you could get the handout in front of you. The final activity we're going to do that's going to look at self-compassion is the compassionate letter to self. For this activity, you'll need the handout that is showing on the screen in front of you now. This is titled Letter to Self. The activity we're going to get you to do now is writing a letter to yourself, but imagining that this letter is being written 2 to 4 years' time. So we want to invite you to think about a challenge that you are currently experiencing. Now take the handout and date it 4 years from now. Imagine yourself having progressed through your course, having coped with the difficulties, the challenges and the stressful events that may have happened along the way. You have finally survived and made it to the other side 2 to 4 years later. You're in a better place and you value yourself for having gotten through it all. Be kind, patient and understanding. You know your history and your life goals. Use your compassion to support yourself. Talk in the second person and describe to yourself the feelings that you're experiencing. Pause the audio for approximately 10 minutes to complete the activity. And don't worry if you don't get it finished in that 10 minutes, you can always come back to this after the workshop. The final bucket hole that we will be looking at is reaching out. Remember that part of the human condition is experiencing challenges and stressors. We need the challenges in order to build emotional resilience. It is important to remember to reach out for support if you feel you need it. Take a moment and have a think about the people in your life that you feel comfortable talking to when you are experiencing a challenge. This may be a friend or a family friend or a family member. Although it may feel uncomfortable at first, as you may not be used to speaking to other people, but like new muscles, the more you reach out, the easier and familiar it will become. Remember, you can also reach out for support from your tutor or program lead or your lecturer if you feel comfortable, as they will be able to look into support for you in terms of the academic side. The university also offers support such as counselling and mental health support from Student Wellbeing. Student Wellbeing offers short-term counselling which can be applied for by emailing Student Wellbeing. We will put the link to our StudyNet page at the resources slide at the end of this workshop, as that will have all the information on our email address and how to contact Student Wellbeing. Please take a couple of minutes to locate on the stress bucket handout the reaching out box and write down people that you can turn to for support when needed. These can include some of the people we have listed above, such as your friends, family members, tutors or academic staff. It can be helpful having this on the stress bucket so that when you're experiencing a challenge or you're stressed, you can look at that bucket and it already has the people on there that you can reach out to. You don't need to think about it.
There are difficult and challenging events in our lives that we can't always control or avoid, but if we realise that we can develop our emotional resilience when facing or managing these difficulties, then we can empower ourselves with confidence and self-worth. Developing and maintaining emotional resilience is a lifelong endeavour, and so we recommend that you work on them as often as you can. We would like to get feedback at the end of our workshops as it helps us when we develop them. We kindly ask if you could complete this short anonymous online feedback form using the link provided. If you would like online support, we have listed several options here. Thank you for participating in this workshop. We hope you've enjoyed it and leave with some more knowledge on what emotional resilience is and how to keep developing it. If you would like further support, please do use the links provided and reach out.